Getting out is very hard. Okay? So if you can divert out early, but once you're in, it's hard to get out. We saw 46% of Hispanic defendants and 48% of black defendants were charged with drug crimes in the United States district courts, compared to 30% of whites. So again, if whites make up 80% of the population, they're only making up 30%. Oh, thank you. Hey, 30% of white defendants. Hispanic defendants are about a third as likely to be released before trial. Why is that so important? To be released before trial, because then you can work on your own defense, right? You might possibly be able to maintain a job while you're proving your innocence. You're out in the community. You have your freedom at stake. You're going to be your number one detective, right? So if you are far less likely to get out and you have a public defender, then we're going to see the cumulative effect increasing, right? Half of the Hispanics in federal prison had no previous criminal record. So we are not looking at a population of people who are cycling in and out of the system. What we're looking is we're growing a population in the system. About 3 out of every 100 Hispanic men between 25 and 29 are sentenced to prison in this country. 3 out of 100. Now, the Pew Foundation just did a report to say that if in any one time in our lives right now, if there are 100 of us in a room, one of us will have been in prison in the United States. And that's an astronomical number. We incarcerate more people than any other industrialized country. So it obviously makes sense then, when we look at this, that when we see disparity, that it's affecting whole cultures here in this country. And Hispanics account for about 25%, or 1 out of every 4 federal inmates. So 1 out of 4 in the federal prison population is going to be of a Hispanic origin. So, and to continue with this, if we look at how this has increased through the years, we've seen it increased from 1991 about 3 times as many Hispanics since 1991 in the system. Now, why is that? What we're seeing is the growth is really due to the enforcement of federal immigration laws. And what's interesting as a criminal justice researcher and someone who's worked in the system is it used to be, when I started working in the system, they were there merely for drugs. Well, now they're mainly in for immigration. We've almost seen a flip in the statistics on why Hispanics and Latinos are coming into the system. And also, the number of undocumented immigrants in this country increased from 3.9 million in 1991 to now about 12 million. And now there's organizations and policies and legislation that has been enacted that is increasing enforcement. There's Operation Gatekeeper, which is by the Immigration and Nationalization Service, which is one of the causes for more Hispanics into the federal system. The number of immigration prosecutions filed by federal prosecutors quadrupled since 2001. So, and there's also the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Fugitive Operations Team. So we have different pockets of federal agencies who are all taking on this issue of illegal immigration. They arrested 34,000 immigrants in fiscal year 2008 as part of its National Fugitive Operations Program. That was a 17-fold increase since 2003. Now this is important, in fact, if we look at immigration offenses, because unlike most other crimes, this is under federal jurisdiction. This will not be under any state jurisdiction. So it's also important to note that federal courts and the federal court system only makes a very small proportion of the overall criminal justice system. About 6% of all offenders in the United States will be sentenced through the federal court system. So when the numbers I'm giving you then are only 6% of what we're seeing in the entire criminal justice system. Okay? So if we look on a larger scale, let's take a look at drug crimes. Here, I'm going to write this down. In this, looking at 1991 for consistency, this is dry. Okay. Well, you tried, and that's what matters. We had 3 times more Hispanics and Latinos in the prison system than we had immigration cases. So it was like, say, 60 to 20. Okay? Now, in 2007, we're seeing a reverse in that pattern. We now have 48% are in our federal court system for immigration, and only 37% are in for drugs, which is an interesting pattern that's starting to develop. But again, that cumulative effect. If a Hispanic is convicted of a federal offense, they are more likely than non-Hispanics to be sentenced to prison. Among all federal offenders sentenced to prison, Hispanics, though, and this is very interesting, were more likely than blacks and whites to get a shorter prison sentence. So while they're more likely to go to prison, we're actually seeing that they're getting a lesser amount of time than their black and white counterparts. And I think I have the exact months. It was 46 months compared to 91 months for the black population, and 62 months for the white population were the average amount of sentences under the federal court system. So it's significantly less. Although they're more likely to go to prison, the sentences that they get are lighter. Hispanics who do not have U.S. citizenship are more likely to receive a prison sentence than citizens by a considerable amount, about 98% difference. So if they do not have a status, a citizenship status, then they really are guaranteed to spend time in prison. And we also see that the average prison sentence has gone down for the Hispanic population. It used to be in 1991, which is what I've been using as my focal point consistently throughout this, right? Is 58 months, and now it's 46. So we are seeing a decrease in the amount of months. I want to talk about women for a second here. There is really no data on Latino women. There is little to nothing out there really on women in prison in general. And then when we start to look at women of color, it's almost non-existent. But there is a couple great organizations in California that have recorded their own population, and we also see a little bit from the federal government. And so putting that together, we're looking at roughly 49% of women in the state and federal prison system are white, 28% are African American, and about 17% are Latina. African American women are incarcerated at 3 times the rate of white women, and Latina women are incarcerated about 1.6 times the rate of white women. And that's really all we know. We know more about the African American community coming out or in prison women than we know about Latinos. And it's a very unfortunate thing that we don't have more data on that. And that's an area that the criminal justice field really needs to spend some time exploring. But being a researcher who's studied women has been told a long time, why are you doing it? Only 10% of the population. Why are you wasting your time? Well, I mean, if we don't know anything, we